Can everyone see the screen? Okay. Excellent. So we are going, this is Broker Series Week 3, number 3 in this series, 3 of 4. Today we'll be covering BRBC, TDS, SPQ, and AVID. What does that mean? That's the Buyer Compensation Agreement, Buyer-Broker Agreement. It is the Transfer Disclosure Statement, which is required seller disclosure in the state of California. SPQ, which is the Seller Property Questionnaire, which is a form that CAR made. Some of it is federally required questions, but some of it is just extra questions that we deemed should be disclosed. And then the Agent Visual Inspection Disclosure, which is a required disclosure. So, welcome everyone. We're going to start with the BRBC. Date prepared. That date does not. Can everyone see the screen? We're good? Okay, yeah. That date is just nothing important. It's just the date prepared so we can reference it. Obviously, you put the buyer U. So this is, buyer 1. And you would be Keller Williams Realty, right? Does it make sense? Or wherever you are. So not your name, but Keller Williams Realty. This buyer-broker agreement must be completed before you do any substantial real estate activities with a buyer, including showing homes and things like that. So representation period is not to exceed 3 months. FYI. If you do a representation period that exceeds 3 months, it is automatically a void agreement and you do not have a valid buyer-broker agreement with your buyer. Now, there is one exception, and this section is for commercial. They try to do it for commercial, but they just wrote it as if the buyer is a corporation, LLC, partnership, that you can then write longer than 3 months. But it has to be an entity, not a trust, but a corporate entity, corporation, LLC, or partnership. We all good on that? We're good? All right. Everyone's all quiet on this one. So, non-exclusive, the A2, 4B here is non-exclusive or exclusive. I always recommend you do exclusive. Exclusive would mean that they have to work with you only. If you do non-exclusive, then they do not have to work with you only. If they use another agent and they find a house and write the offer, you are out the commission. So I would write that exclusivity and explain it to them. I love your emoji, Jen. Let's go to 2B, property to be acquired. Now, you have to think of this section as something that restricts the scope of your buyer-broker agreement. Okay? So when you sign a buyer-broker agreement, you are saying, I'm going to represent you as a real estate agent for the next 3 months. And I'm going to, essentially, it defaults to single-family resident. I'm going to be anywhere in California. You have to use me if you're going to buy a single-family home. So in B1, if you want to extend that, or condo or manufactured home, if you want to extend that to multifamily 2 to 4 units, 5 or more units, industrial, vacant land, commercial, tenancy in common, or only a specific property, you will put those there. But if you check any of these boxes, you are expanding the scope of your BRBC from single-family homes, condos, and manufactured homes to other types of real estate. Make sense? And just FYI, if you are checking anything that is considered a commercial, which is 5 or more units, industrial, commercial, vacant land that is for commercial use, then we have a prohibition in the brokerage against doing commercial transactions. You have to either refer it to a commercial agent or get a commercial agent to agree to code the transaction with you. So please note that. If you put any specific properties, you are then restricting your scope of your BRBC to those properties only, even if there's other things checked. So please be aware, this B1 can help you expand the scope of your buyer broker agreement, but this last checkbox, the following properties, will restrict it, the scope of the things. Also B2, location. This will also restrict your scope of your BRBC. So think about your BRBC. I got 3 months restriction. B1 makes it only single family homes, or I can expand that. B2 location says it goes from I have jurisdiction over all of California. If you put counties or cities, it's going to restrict that from California down to those counties or cities that you put in there. So additional description, if you have any other restrictions, you put those in there in B3, that's what those will go for additional restrictions on what this buyer broker agreement will be represented. So just FYI, I've had clients that'd be like, not myself, but I've dealt with broker issues where they just sign the agreement, single family, and then lo and behold, the buyer goes and looks at a duplex and wants to buy the duplex, live on one side and rent out the other, and they do that. And this wasn't checked. Technically, there was no buyer broker agreement for a multi-unit property. They did not have a buyer broker agreement for that property. Does that make sense? So I've had instances where they put in counties, and these are the counties that the buyer identified they wanted to work in. And then the buyer ends up buying a home not in that county, and they were out of commission on that. So please, I know some of you are like doing the conversation with your buyers, and they say, I want to look in Sacramento and Stanislaus counties, and you put those in there. Just know you are severely restricting the scope of your BRBC. So now it's good to note those so that you know what to send them. You don't necessarily need to put that in your BRBC as it will restrict the scope of your BRBC. But if they say, but don't worry about Stanislaus County, I have an agent, I'm working in Stanislaus County, I only want you for Sacramento County, that would be an instance where I would put Sacramento County only in there. I hope that, any questions on that? So
Yeah, John, so do you recommend to just leave it blank?
I recommend to leave it blank from the agent perspective. Does it make sense? And I
Oh,
would make the buyer want to restrict that, right? So
okay. Okay, thank you.
because I've had it where we've seen it where there's buyers, and I've seen it where it's like I'm either going to buy in Sacramento or I'm going to buy in in Merced, right? So like very wide, right? So I wouldn't recommend restricting unless the buyer is really asking you to restrict the scope of the BRBC. So
Okay, thank you.
on C here, uh, 2BC. Additional buyer preferences, if you check that box, it will add a bit form, which will put restrictions in there, has a form that has all their stuff. I would be now the bit form is good as a questionnaire of what you want to ask them. I would be hesitant to put that in there because it could be construed as, even though it doesn't say it could be construed as restricting your buyer broker agreement with that buyer. So properties excluded from representation. So if the buyer has previously, say, have fiduciary has a procuring cause issue with another agent, maybe they have fired their current agent and moving to you as an agent and sign a new buyer broker agreement. But just so you know, if a previous agent has showed them certain properties, that previous agent may have a procuring cause issue they may be entitled to the commission if you were to write an offer on one of the previous shown properties by the other agent. So this would be an instance of where you're going to have that sort of issue. You would list those properties. And if you're going to um, try to show the property again and take away the procuring cause for the buyer, please contact me as your broker. We will need to talk about what you would need to do to have a preponderance of evidence that you were the procuring cause agent of that offer. So, and we would have to work on that. So, D7. Any questions on the B section? So we're talking about expanding the scope beyond single family and also restricting the scope with specific property information, property addresses, or counties or cities. So now we're getting to the meat and potatoes. So buyer compensation notice. This is the amount of compensation. And I recommend you put 3, and this is the reason. If you put anything less and you get more when you write your offer, we will have to be forced to restrict your commission down to whatever is on the buyer broker agreement. So I recommend you start high and reduce it if you need to. Now maybe some buyers are reluctant to do that. I would then work on your presentation. We have not had a buyer disagree with that if you do your presentation correctly. So, but I recommend 3%. Of course, you can do less. And there's this clause E2-4G, which is important. And this is what you need to explain to your buyer. If the broker receives compensation from sellers or others for broker's rotation buyer, that amount shall be credited against the buyer's obligation. And then you'll see here, broker shall not receive any amount in excess of the amount specified. So that's where it restricts you. Okay. Now let's talk about everyone clear on compensation. Continuation right to payment broker involved properties. If you put a calendar days in here, if you leave it blank, it's not appropriate. It's not applicable. It's void. It's removed from the contract. But if you put a day, like 90 days from the period, continuation period, this says after the 90 days or the 3 months of your broker agreement, if on day 95 they use another agent, but they show a property or they write an offer on a property that you showed, you will be owed compensation, is what that says. But you have to have days in there. And you have to provide a list of homes, properties to the buyer prior to the expiration or cancellation of the BRBC. Makes sense? So for this clause to be active, you must have a days listed in there at the time of BRB signing, and prior to cancellation or expiration of the BRBC, you must provide the buyer a list of properties that you were involved with, shown them, or offered on, for this to be a valid claim against further compensation after the expiration of the BRBC.
John, how many days can we go out? How far can we go out? Can we go 180?
You can go 180. I wouldn't recommend that sort of practice. I wouldn't recommend going beyond 180, just out of common practice. If you do anything egregious, I've seen courts and even DRE say that's unreasonable, right? So you got to keep it reasonable. But the longest I've seen is 180 days, and I think that's reasonable, right? So,
Okay.
Cancellation rights and notice, and I want you to understand this. Non-exclusive, cancel upon receipt. So this box check up here, if you don't check that box up in 2A to make it, if it's still non-exclusive, the buyer can cancel immediately by texting you a text or emailing you. It is immediately canceled. Okay. If it is checked exclusive, they can cancel, but they have to do it. They have to give you 30-day notice. Okay. So you have a little bit of a negotiation ability if you check exclusivity, which I recommend.
What about that box 16 on that one page that has to be signed by them? I noticed on DocuSign, it has the initials there, but they can bypass that.
Which one?
Unless you hard do it, the box 16 for that shows they have to initial there for it to be considered exclusive.
Box 16.
Yeah.
It's box 15.
There's a spot.
It's box 15.
Yeah, they have to initial here. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so there's a spot. Yeah.
Yeah,
So there's
well,
a spot like DocuSign. It allows them to bypass it. I have to manually go in and hard code it now for them to make sure
Yes,
that they
I had
talk
that
about that.
problem too.
If you go straight from car forms and connect your DocuSign and you do it through that system, that means you don't log into DocuSign separately, you just send it through DocuSign. Any initial that is optional will end up optional on the DocuSign, which is this one. And also on the RPA, the mediation arbitration is considered optional, so the buyers can skip it. So just know, both on the RPA and this form, if you're going to do this 15, you're doing exclusive, you need to go in and you can just click on it and it'll say optional at the top, and you can toggle it to be required. Make sense? So questions? I'll go back, but thank you. But yes, that must be initialed for you to, so the buyer is properly noticed on what exclusivity means. So, okay. Time to deliver buyer personal information. This is 5 days. This is really to help you make sure that your buyers get that they understand they need to get financial information to the lender generally to make this happen. Okay, now this is the linchpin here, G2. Buyer does not have sufficient funds to pay the broker. So I imagine a lot of times you're going to be checking this box. They're saying, John, I'm happy to use you, but I don't want to pay you a commission. If the seller doesn't pay, I don't want to do it. So you would have to check this box. Buyer's obligation to transact is contingent upon the seller's agreement to pay the amount of compensation. So this is saying I have to get it from the seller. If there's anything that is above that the buyer has to either approve it or they can cancel the BRBC. So, for example, if you have 3 in there and you get a 2.5 compensation, you need to do a modification of terms, BA, buyer agreement, and you need to change it for that property down to 2.5, so this provision will not kick in. Clear as mud? So here's where we put other terms. I imagine you wouldn't put other terms in, but buyer initials, broker initials. If you do not sign it, it is not a valid agreement. There should be no additional advisories you should put on there, I don't imagine, so just be careful. All these, if you look on this, every one of these check boxes will correspond to a paragraph. So E1 talking about compensation will be 4B. So if you look at 4B, it'll talk about broker right to compensation. So just know if you have confusion on what any of these boxes do, just look at that provision and it will toggle you to the appropriate paragraph so you can read about what it is. Obviously, I highly recommend that you read all the forms. If you read the forms, they actually do make a lot of sense and you can have a lot better representation of your clients. So initials on here, on page 2, initials again on page 3, initials again on page 4. By the way, this is saying they are doing mediation arbitration if you were to be in dispute with your buyer. An exclusivity clause, as Marissa mentioned, 15, they must initial this if you are asking them to be exclusive. So, and as she noted, if you do it directly from car forms or zip forms into your DocuSign, if it is an optional thing for the buyer, it will end up an optional box in the DocuSign, and you have to go in and manually change that to required. Entity buyers, if they're a corporation, a trust, an LLC, probate, partnership, power of attorney, any of those things, they're entity buyers. You would check that box. You would type the entity name, Barnado Family Trust. Does that make sense? And you would put the authorized signers, Jonathan Barnado. Does it make sense? And you would put those in there. They would sign as Jonathan Barnado, and then I would put title trustee. Does that make sense? So actually, it should be Barnado. So, and the buyer is Barnado Family Trust. So does that make sense? So if they're buying it. Your signatures are here. If you want to have more than 2 agents, you put your agent information. You can have 2 agents here. If you do 2 agents here, you won't have to do an AAA form later. So, well, actually, if you do, you still have to do AA, but you have to check that box. Any questions? If you're checking the box for 2 different companies, that is not allowed in our brokerage. Please refrain from doing that. That is the BRBC. Please note, it is very hard to enforce a BRBC. So you can't go to the association and things like that. It is basically a mediation, arbitration, small claims court claim if you want to challenge a buyer with a BRBC compensation schedule. So please be attentive. Don't use the BRBC as a hammer. Try to get the relationship with them where they want to honor that BRBC. So, okay. Any questions on that? That's advisory. Don't worry, they just sign on that. Possible representation of more than one buyer. I do want to talk about dual agency real quick because I tried to talk about it multiple times. But if you're doing dual agency, meaning you got the listing and the buyer, just note you can't let the seller, you can't tell the buyer or either party's negotiation position other than the seller's list price or the buyer's offer price. So you can't tell the seller, hey, the buyer is willing to go above this, just counter them. And you can't tell the buyer, hey, just come in less than list price, I'll get the seller there. That is illegal. That would be a violation of dual agency. And dual agency is the #1 way agents get sued.
Hi, can you repeat that, John? What did you say?
So when you're doing a dual agency transaction, and it says here, a dual agent may not, without the express permission of the respective party, disclose to the other party confidential information, including, but not limited to, facts relating to either the buyer or seller's financial position, motivations, bargaining position, or other percentage that may impact the price, including the seller's willingness to accept a price less than the list price or the buyer's willingness to pay a price greater than the price offered.
Got
So
it.
if you say I have a listing and I get a buyer and they're signing the BRBC and they're going to say this and you're going to be a dual agent, and you say, don't worry, I can get the seller down on price, you have violated your fiduciary duty to the seller. And the buyers go like, John, I understand, but if you sell them, or I can get your offer accepted over the other offers, even if it's less, you have violated your fiduciary duty to the seller. If you say, and then the buyers go and the buyers say, like, we're going to offer, say the house is 500, we're going to offer 475. You're like, great, we offer, but we'll go to 500 if needed to get the house. If you go to the sellers and say, hey, can't counter at list price, they'll come up. That is a violation of fiduciary to the buyers. So just be very careful. And actually, about always every year, between 60 and 70% of lawsuits against real estate agents involve dual agency transactions. So you have to be very careful about that. So I always try to point that out, especially if you're signing a BRBC with a buyer who wants to offer on your listing, right? So there you go. Any questions on that? Okay, let's talk about the TDS. The TDS, as you probably learned in school back in the day with your real estate school, it is a required seller disclosure. Let me start here. California is a seller disclosure state. What does that mean? That means there is liability and requirement by the seller to disclose any defects that affect the value or desirability of the property. They are required to disclose that. And right at the beginning, if this is a duplex, triplex, or fourplex, you have to check this box because you have to do a TDS for each unit. You have to put the city in here, the city of, county of, and described address of. We will require all that. And you have to put the date you are completing the TDS. This date matters. Trust me. I've been in arbitrations, lawsuits where issues may happen on the property, but they happen after the TDS was filled out, therefore exempting the seller from disclosure. So that date you put in there is very important when it comes to when we do lawsuits, because it's going to say the seller knew about it at this time and date, or didn't know about it at this time and date. That becomes very important. Do you understand? So we got it, and then you would put this date. All right. This is another thing, and I see this all the time messed up. If there are any inspections on the house completed or received prior, you must check this box. Additional, oh, sorry, not the second box here. Additional, if you have reports completed pursuant to the contract of sale, received a deposit. So if you have seller inspections already done and you want them to acknowledge them prior to consummating the contract, you need to check that box. Make sense? If you have inspections that you just want them to know are tied to the TDS, then you would do these. And that is any things. And then you would, if there's no other disclosures, you would check this box, no substantive disclosures for this transfer. Please check this box. Seller is or is not occupying the property. These are things that would be located in the property. I want to make sure everyone understands what these are. Range, oven. Do we understand the difference between a range and an oven? Microwave, dishwasher, trash compactor versus a garbage disposal. Trash compactors are very rare now, but sometimes you still see them in luxury homes. Washer, dryer hookups, rain gutters, burglar alarms, CO detectors, smoke detectors, fire alarm, TV antenna, satellite dish, intercom, central heating, central inner, evaporator, coolers. Anyone know what evaporator cooler? There are not too many around anymore, but those are the ones that sit on the attic and they use water to evaporate and cool the house. Those are not very common anymore. Wall windows, sprinklers, public sewer systems, septic tanks, sump pump. Sump pump is when you have a low-lying area. Typically, you'll see sump pumps in basements where there's a bathroom or drain and the water has to get pumped up to the sewer line upstairs. That is called a sump pump. Water softener, patio decking, built-in barbecue, gazebos, garage attached, which means it's attached to the house, detached to the house, carport, which means it's not enclosed, just a covering, automatic garage door openers, number remotes, sauna, hot tub, locking safety cover, pool, child-resistant barrier. In California, pools are required to have a fencing around them or be from child-resistant, so that is it there? Is there a pool heater, water heater? Who supplies the water, gas, window screens, window security bars, quick release mechanism. Current code for window bars, security bars over windows, there must be a latch mechanism inside the room where the window is that will allow the window bars to be released and open for fire escape reasons. If there are a lot of old window bars on houses that don't have that, so if they don't, you wouldn't click that. Just know if you're doing an appraisal, it'll probably get caught in appraisal to either remove the bars or replace them. So water conserving plumbing fixtures, if your seller has no idea what that is, do not check that box. Exhaust fans are those fans in your bathroom that suck out the moisture and heat. Similarly, you'll find those in kitchens, over the stove, or in laundry rooms often. So please list that where it is. 220-volt wiring is the big brown black thing that you see in there. That's often used for dryers, washing machines, sometimes appliances in the garage, or sometimes refrigerators. I've seen it too. So just note that where those locations. Fireplace is pretty started. These are gas starter. Roof type. Do we know all our roof types? Comp is the most common. Composition shingle. There is wold comp. There is tile. There is flat roof. So there are a bunch of different roof types. Make sure that is accurate. Age of the roof, that's pretty awesome. And then this is the thing, are the best of your knowledge, any of the above not in operating condition? That means everything here. The number one way sellers get sued is in real estate transactions, which often involve the agent as well, is they do not disclose anything that is not operating up here. So please, when you're talking to buyers about filling these out, they need to make sure they're accurate. Any questions on the first page of the TDS? Second page. Is the seller aware of any significant defects of following? Yes or no? Interior walls, ceilings, floors, exterior walls, insulation, roofs, windows, doors, foundation slabs, driveways, sidewalks, walls and fences, electric system, plumbing, and other structural components. This has to do with the envelope of the house. So, as well as the exterior of the home. So if you have any issues there, please check the box and do that. This will be talking about settling issues, cracks and unevenness in the driveway, leaks in the roof, foundation issues, those sort of things would go here. Then we get to C, which is the seller aware of any of the following: substances, materials, products that may be environmental hazards, not limited to asbestos, formaldehyde, radon gas, lead-based paint, mold, fuel, chemical storage tanks, contaminated soil, water, or subject property. Please, okay, let me talk about this. I forgot to talk about this. The standard of knowledge is the seller aware? So if the seller asks you, what should I check on this? You should ask yourself, am I aware of this issue? And if they are not, they should check no. If they are, they should check yes. The seller will know if they have one of the substance issue, because it is usually involving a government agency at that point, tagging the property as well. So features of property shared in common with adjoining land, such as walls, fence, and driveways, whose use or responsibilities affect the subject property, you should almost always be checking yes on this, as we are a good neighbor state when it comes to fencing and walls. And so that means both parties on that border are responsible for the cost and care of that wall or fence. So you should be checking that yes. If you're checking it no and there is, your seller could be open to exposure as well. Room additions and structural easements, encroachments, easements, or similar matters affecting. What's an encroachment or easement? Encroachment or easements are use. Well, an easement is use of the property by a neighboring property. So if anyone is using the property, your property, say their property is landlocked and you have to drive through their property to get to, they have to drive through your property to get to land property, that would be an easement. An encroachment is where a neighboring property, they have encroached. That means they have moved the fence line beyond what is the boundary of between yours and taking some of your land or across your, and so that would be an encroachment. So if any of those issues are happening, so I ask, have you ever had a dispute with your neighbor about the fence line and where the fence line is? And if they say, yeah, we argued about it, then you need to be talking about it because that may be an encroachment issue. Make sense? 4A, 4 and 5 are noted. This is good. Also note to see 4 and 5. Room addition, structural modification, or other alteration or repairs made without necessary permits. So, rooms addition, structural or other alterations not in compliance with building codes. So please do not advise sellers on whether, if they didn't do it with permits, but it looks like it's done to building codes. Let the seller dictate what that is, please. You are not a inspector, knows what building codes are. And as you see this note, if the transfer required the property and within 18 months accepting an offer to sell it, transfer shall make any additional scars with room addition, structural and other alterations to repairs and seller property questionnaire. So it's asking for additional information in the SPQ, which we'll talk about next, if they say they have added structural or done structural modifications to the property. Any questions on 4 and 5? We get a lot of dispute on what that looks like. Please note, if the seller knows, even if they didn't do it, but that in addition to the home was added, and when they bought it, it was there, but they know it's not permitted, they need to check the boxes appropriately, and you need to advise them to check the boxes appropriately. I've had lawsuits and mediations when the seller knew, they didn't do it, but the seller knew because when they bought it, they were disclosed, and they never disclosed it to the buyer, and there was a lawsuit. So please note, please make sure they're aware, even if they're not the ones who did the room addition. All right. Fill, compact or otherwise, on the property any portions of. Fill is usually because you're having erosion issues or foundation issues. Sometimes they will bring in extra dirt, fill, to replace the eroding dirt to prevent further damage or prop up the property. If you get fill, you will know, usually it's houses on hillsides, houses in rural areas that are having erosion issues that are undermining the foundation. That's where you'll see fill or compact that are happening. You need to ask yourself that. Any settling from any cause, slippage, sliding, or other soil problems. Often fill on 6 is used to address issues of slippage, especially sliding or soil problems. So you need to talk about it. Flooding, drainage, or grading problems. And in the Sacramento area, there are often raised houses that have, because we have a low water table here because of the Sacramento American rivers, a lot of times in the winter, water will pool underneath the house. While not necessarily dangerous, that is a flooding or drainage issue or grading problem. So if there's grading problems where water is at times, even seasonally, getting into the house or getting underneath the house, that would need to be disclosed then. And obviously, if there was a flood at some point, you need to disclose that as well. Major damage to the property from fire, earthquake, flood, or landslide. I think that's pretty obvious. Any zoning violations, non-conforming usage violation of setback requirements. Setback requirements are setbacks, meaning the county or city or local jurisdiction require the building be set back from front, back, and sides a certain amount of space from the property lines. That's called a setback. So if they're clearly violating a setback, or there's a zero lot line house, so it's literally sitting on the lot line or things like that, or maybe they put up a shed and the shed is on the setback line, so you may have issues when it comes to setbacks, non-conforming uses, zoning violations. Neighborhood noise problems or other nuisances. If there is a barky dog next door and every time you go outside they bark and bark all the time, and your sellers want to actually try to poison the dog at one point, that's a noisy thing. If the house backs up to a truck stop and there's trucks all the time, they're beep, 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 backing up, that would be neighborhood noise. So please, or other nuisances. For example, if you're in Rancho Cordova in Anatolia, out there in Anatolia, there's a tanning hide factory out there that makes leather. And during the summer, man, when they're tanning, it smells. That would be a neighborhood issue. Makes sense? So you need to do that. CC&Rs or other deed restrictions. Please note if there is a HOA, there are CC&Rs. If there's not, but if there's no HOA, there could still be CC&Rs. Your prelim would let you know. Homeowner association, which is pretty common. Common areas, which is pretty common. Notice of abatement or citations against the property. This would be both. If there is an HOA, this would be notice of citations or abatement against the property, both by the city or local or county or the HOA. And then any lawsuits against the seller affecting the real property would be there. And anything if you check yes to will need to be disclosed down there. Any questions on C? Just note these questions are required by California law. So not answering these questions could subject the seller to a lawsuit. You would sign that there. And then agents, you are required to sign this there. And it actually asks you on what you're going to do on your agent visual inspection disclosure. And most people check this box and see attached agent visual inspection disclosure. Now I want to note this. I talked about this back in the day, and I talked this about when I talked about the RPA 2 weeks ago. Even though you have contingencies, inspection, appraisal, and loan. In California, under California law, there is a 5-day right of rescission, separate from the contingencies, that says when the transfer disclosure statement is sent, the buyer has 5 days right of rescission. That means they can cancel the deal. Even if they've waived all contingencies, they can still cancel the deal and get their deposit back based on the TDS. Now, the TDS includes the listing agent's AVID, agent visual inspection disclosure. So if you provide the TDS SPQ, but you're lazy about your AVID, and day 25 of the escrow, you finally get around to doing your AVID and you send the AVID to them on day 25, they have released all contingencies. Basically from day 25 to 30 of that escrow, now the buyer can cancel the deal and get their deposit back because you provided a TDS disclosure after any, at that time, anytime you provide it. So this is not just a one-time thing. It's anytime you provide a disclosure that is attached to the TDS. Let's talk about what disclosure is attached to the TDS. Your AVID, the listing agent's AVID, prelim, NHD, CC&Rs, HOA docs. So some of you who are listing agents and you get HOA docs later in the process after escrow starts, if you finally get the HOA docs day 25 of escrow, guess what? You just gave them a 5-day right of rescission. So I highly recommend when and this is what my team does. We do our listing agent AVID at the time of listings. Well, I do a 2-step process: sign, and then we go back for photos, and we do the bubble sheet, and we do our AVID then, so that when we do seller disclosures, we don't have these multiple 5-day right of rescissions happening throughout the transaction. And trust me, I've had agents do this. We represented a buyer. They were about to close, literally about to sign and fund. Buyer gets notice that he may be laid off from his job. He wants to cancel the deal. All contingencies released. Seller had already moved out of the house. They moved into their new home because this was about to close. Release contingencies. Agent came to me and said, buyer, I have this buyer. This is the issue. I said, did you get any of the major document disclosures recently? He's like, actually, yeah. Yesterday we finally got the HOA docs. That's what we've been waiting on, the HOA docs. They haven't got them. I said, cancel on the 5-day right of rescission. And the listing agent went crazy. I said, talk to your broker. The broker confirmed it. They released the commission. And the seller got in trouble. The seller canceled the deal. The seller asked the listing agent for money because they were late in producing the HOA docs. They were lazy and they caused to be vacant. And guess what? They canceled the listing and listed with someone else. So please be careful on that. But agent visual inspection closure should do that. Sellers should sign, buyers should sign, agents should sign. Any questions on the TDS? Required. The only time the TDS is not required is in certain exempt situations with trusts or corporations. But please, that's the very small minority, and we'll be very tight on that. Okay, on to seller property questionnaire. Okay, very small minority, and we'll be very tight on that. Okay, on to seller property questionnaire. Okay, this is an additional document that is not required under California law, but covers a bunch of other laws. And these first questions, statutory contractually required disclosures, these laws cover federally required questions. So not state required questions, but federally required questions. So that's why the SPQ is here. Everything after this is not required by law, but is good to disclose. So as a brokerage, we require it. So make sure you put the address in there. If this property is a duplex or triplex, you would check that for more units. If there is multiple units, you'll need to do an SPQ for each unit. Reports or inspections, warranties, maintenance, estimates, studies, surveys, other documents, including leases, leased items, repairs, condition of repairs. If they flip the home, what's the contractor bids, any of those issues, documents that the seller has needs to be checked, yes, and you need to list out what documents are going to be provided. Yep. Everyone good on that? Okay, let's talk. And let me tell you about this. Actually, we have reasons to, and the buyer is actively right now suing the seller. We represent the buyer, and the seller, because they had foundations, there were some settling issues on one corner of the house. And so the seller and the listing agent, who was related to the seller, actually, it was their uncle, did a foundation inspection and got a bid to repair the settling in the corner of the house for $13,000. Seller this was about a year ago. Seller then doesn't list it then, but like 9 months later says, okay, I'm ready to list now. They wanted to update the inspection, so they go back and they do another foundation inspection, except this time the foundation inspector does the whole house, and they find settling issues in other parts of the house. And the bid goes from $13,000 to $65,000. And then they list. But the problem is when they listed it, they only listed it and they disclosed the $13,000 bid. They didn't disclose the $65,000 bid. They didn't list it, didn't provide it. Go to close. The buyer got a credit. Buyer got a credit to do it, to pay for this. They call the foundation guy to get it done. He's like, I got the 13, but what about the 65? We find out about the 65. And this seller and listing agent said, yeah, we got that inspection, and it's actually listed with the seller. And it says, but we deemed it was just an upcharge, an upsell kind of thing, and it's not deemed relevant to the transaction. Yeah, they're in a lawsuit now, so they're going to lose pretty badly. So please make sure you have those inspections. There's going to be pressure from the seller to not disclose certain things. And just know it's very rare that when there's a lack of disclosure lawsuit that they know they will name the agent just because they know you have E&O insurance. So please get your sellers to disclose property. And please don't cooperate. Definitely don't cooperate with your seller to hide reports. You will be fired by me and likely reported to BRBC. So FYI, so do not do that. Okay. We're going to 6. 6 is the federally, or there are different federal laws all over the place that require different disclosures, or state laws actually too. This one's a state law. Within the last 3 years, the death of occupant on the property, yes or no? And note to sell the manner of death may be material fact to the buyer and should be disclosed as set for a death of HRC. So in this case, you only have to disclose if they died within the last 3 years. The buyer can ask how it happened. And manner of death is considered a material fact. So if they were murdered in the property, you have to say they were murdered in the property. If they died of natural causes, you can say they died of natural causes. But how they died is considered a material fact and must be disclosed. The only exception is if the person's died in the last by HIV or AIDS. Then you do not have to disclose. Ironic. I will say, as a seller and a listing agent, as a broker, we have had times where the seller has disclosed that someone had died in the property, but it is not within 3 years. If the seller has that knowledge, I would almost recommend doing it, even if it's beyond 3 years. But that is also up to the seller at that point. But I would do that. So, an order from an order of government health official identifying the property is contaminated by methamphetamines. You will know if your property's been tagged by methamphetamines. Literally, it will be like a Superfund site and you'll get tagged. There's a whole department of hazardous waste at each county. They will have tagged it and you will know. Release of illegal controlled substances on or beneath the property. This is usually related to a methamphetamine lab and usually something going wrong, like an explosion or a spill or something happening. Whether the property is located just to a industrial zone use, which is pretty obvious. You just need to look at the map. Where the property is affected by a nuisance of industrial zone use. This would be like my tanning, that Hyde tanning, a leather factory near our Anatolian in Rancho Cordova. That would be an example of a nuisance created by industrial zone near the property, even though it may not be next to the property. Where the property is located with my formal state and ordinance location. This is for military training purpose. So if they're near a base where they fire live rounds, things like that, a gun range, that would fall into that area. The property is a condominium or planned unit development or other common interest subdivision. If there is an HOA fee or things like that, then yes, you would qualify that. Insurance claims against the property will last 5 years. Just so you know, homeowner insurance is unlike driver insurance, where the claim follows the driver, and homeowner's insurance, the claim follows the house. So if a previous homeowner has made a claim, it will on a house. The new buyer, if they make a claim or they go to get insurance on the house, that claim will stick with the house, and that will make the new buyer's insurance higher. And right now, insurance is crazy right now in California, so please note that if they have made an insurance claim in the last 5 years on the house. Matters affecting title of the property, I think we're pretty similar to that. Plumbing fixtures on the property that are non-compliant plumbing fixtures defined by code. Please don't tell them if they have water conserving plumbing fixtures or not in the house. Generally, if the house was built post 2018-ish, they probably are compliant, but I wouldn't note that unless the seller notes that. Any inspection reports are exterior balconies, stairways, or other elevated elements on the building with 3 or more units prepared within the last 6 years or 9 years for condominiums. So there is a new law that says exterior balconies, stairways, elevated elements that are supported by wood elements over a certain story height and must have an inspection done every 6 years and every 9 years for condominiums on the property, and that just naturally be in place. So just be careful if you're offering on a property or representing a property that has this, especially if it's an HOA, for example, they should have an inspection on site, and this is now required, so it is in place. So please note that. If you want to see CAR Form WBSA, it'll explain that. It will also explain people with certain licenses who are valid inspectors for exterior balconies and stairways, and also provide the exceptions versus height stories, and also provide exception on how the balconies or stairways are supported with what materials they exempt them also. So please note that if your seller is unaware, you may be required to have that in place. Material facts or defects affecting the buyer part not otherwise disclosed to the buyer. If there's anything wrong with the property that you feel would be a material fact or defect affecting the value or desirability of the property, you should check yes and list it there. Any questions? That is page 1. I went through a lot there. SPQ page 2. Repairs, alterations. Any modifications, replacement, improvements, property on the property, including those from home warranty claims. So this is a wide thing. This is asking you to go into the past. Have you fixed anything, repaired anything? You need to have your buyers, you need to have your sellers think. Have you done any remodeling, improvements, which I guarantee most have, so you need to start talking about that. Any alterations, modifications, replacements for energy or water efficiency improvement or renewable? Have they installed solar? Maybe they put in a different water heater, right? For this. So ongoing or recurrent maintenance to the property. Do they always call out a sewer clean out every year because the tree roots get in the sewer line? Pest control service. If they have those things, they would check those boxes. Any part of the property painted in the last 12 months? Yes. If so, leave note at 1 and 2 blank. Before 1970, if the property was built before 1978, then you put yes or no. And if yes, whether we're done painting according to the laws of the EPA, or sorry, not laws, regulations of the EPA regarding painting and resurfacing lead-based paint homes, which is generally a home that was painted prior to 1978. You would not check those boxes if you don't know what you're doing. So please remember the standard is seller aware. It's where that you should be checking those boxes, that the seller is aware that it is lead-based paint. If the seller doesn't know it's lead-based paint, and that means they have an inspection, please don't tell them it's lead. Just note that you don't know. Whether you purchase a property within 18 months and offer sell it, whether yes or no, are there any room additions, improvements that have been in the contract while they own the property? So yes. If yes, then they have to seller should provide an explanation below a list of improvements and the name and contact for each contractor to perform services of $1,000 or more. This is new. This is new law, actually. Seller shall provide an explanation, a list of improvements of which the seller has obtained permits. The seller has attached the copies of permits to especially for those improvements which the seller does not have a permit. The seller may include a statement identifying those improvements. The seller were not provided by permits, third-party improvements, and contact them. So it's going to say, 1, I need a list of all the work done to the property and who were the contractors who did those. And then it's going to say how much was permitted and how much was not permitted, and what was permitted and what was not permitted. So this is you flippers out there, or you representing flippers. Just note, this is now a requirement. And this has been a result of so many poor quality flips happening and lawsuits happening. Actually, it's kind of funny, is lawsuits on flips are now starting to exceed lawsuits on lack of seller disclosure in real estate transactions within California. So this is a very hot issue. So if you are representing flippers and they're using contractors, you need to provide that. If they are doing permits or not permits, you need to get that clear and provide that information clearly to the buyer, or your seller is likely can face a lawsuit if they lie or do not disclose this. It's now under California law. That is new, so please be aware. Structural systems, appliances, defects with heating, air conditioning, electrical, plumbing, water, sewer, wasteful, septic systems, sump pumps, wells, gutters, roof, chimneys, fire, crawl space, attic, soil, grading, drainage, retaining walls, exterior doors. Pretty obvious. Solar system, existence of a solar system. If they leased it, are they leasing it? Does the seller does the buyer need to assume the lease? So if you have a solar system, you need to provide car form solar. So if they check yes, you should provide the car form solar. Is there any leased items? Now, leased items, what are leased items typically? Solar power, water softening systems, water purifiers, alarm system, propane tanks. Solar power, these can be sometimes long. Alarms are generally a year or 2. Propane tanks can be up to 5 years. So just note, if you see these things in the house, you need to ask them, how long have you had those? Are those leased? Do you create a lease payment? Remember, because the buyer will have to assume the lease As part of the TDS disclosures is you have to provide copies of the lease with them with the seller disclosures. Similarly, if you provide a lease later, it will trigger a 5-day right of rescission. So please make sure if there are lease items that you get a copy of the lease and you provide it to the buyer along with your seller disclosures as a way to do that. So, and an alternative to the septic system on serving the property. If you have an alternative to a sewer or septic system, please let me know. There are weird ones, but that's kind of weird. Whether any structure on the property is used, sorry, other than the main improvement is used as a dwelling. So is there a barn, a she shed, an ADU? This would be ADUs used for as a dwelling. So, and then it says, are there separate utilities? Was it permitted? And that is new too. Disaster relief or insurance or settlement. So if they've done any claims for flood assistance or other disasters, receiving domestic water storage tank assistance. So did they have to, so sometimes when things happen, do they have to act, those big water tanks you see around the city all over the place, those are your domestic water storage tanks. Those kick into place in case the water system fails in the local area. So this is saying, have you been receiving this type of domestic water, meaning that the water system is failing in the area? There's an area in near Patterson where there is a water issue similar to this, and that would be disclosed there. So any of those issues, your seller would know, obviously. Water related and mold issues. There's water intrusion to the property, leaks from the appliance slab, roof, standing, drainage, flooding, underground, moisture, water related soil settling, slippage, or affecting the property, and problems with mold, fungus, spores, blah, 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 past or present. So if they had it before, you need to tell them about it. Rivers, streams, channels, underground, high water tables, all those things would be disclosed. This would be an example of where you'd put water underneath the house, right? So on a raised foundation. Past or present pets, past or present livestock, past or present odors, urine, feces, discoloration, past or present eradication of it. So all those need to be disclosed. Surveys, easements, encroachments, boundary disputes. Anyone who's using the property with or without your permission. Use of any never by you, or you have an easement on another property with this property. So landscaping, disease or infested operational sprinklers, automatic or manual operated. Is there any area of the trees that is not covered by the sprinkler system? Pool heater is an operational. Spa heater is an operational. Past defects with the sprinkler system, pools, spas, water, ponds, streams, anything like that. Condos, this is HOA stuff. So is there if you're in a condo community, generally you're going to check yes on these. Property being the kind is located in new development, or there's a homeowner accession to the property. Are there common areas? Generally there are. Sometimes there's not. CCNRs, other deed restrictions. Generally there are CCNRs. And does it give power to the authority over improvements to the property? Likely it does if there's an HOA. Improvements are inconsistent with, are there any improvements not inconsistent with the HOA or anything on the property without required approval from the HOA? So those are issues there. And you will, trust me, those get real too. Other title liens issues, other signing of the form. Please make sure the people signing the form are actually the people on title. We've had that issue too. Just FYI on this, I've had this issue too, where there's been a lawsuit on this. If someone has power of attorney over someone else because they're incapacitated and that person dies, the power of attorney goes away. That power of attorney does not have power over the person if they are dead. Please note that. And all leases, options, and claims affecting that relating to vital property, past, present, pending lawsuits from the HOA or other people, common issues with adjoining landowners, fence, encroachment, easement issues, private transfer fees. There are some private transfer fees. They just trigger the sale. Generally, the seller pays. It's handled in the RPA. Any PACE or hero liens. PACE or hero liens are these egregious liens that were put in as part of this energy efficiency thing. It was probably about a decade ago. But essentially, they would get loan, and it was targeted toward government employees and police officers and firefighters, stuff like that. But they would do a loan, and they would do a bunch of energy improvements to the property, and they would have the loan paid off through the property tax bill, which creates a whole bunch of issues. And so just FYI, that would be those kind of things. And generally, the seller will have to pay that off at close. The cost of any alteration to the property, neighborhood issues, noise issues, and it lists the following. neighbors, traffic, parking, congestion, airplanes, flying, freeway, schools. So if the school is near there and their street gets packed with cars at 8:30 in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you need to disclose that. Any past or present disputes with the neighborhood might impact the use of development enjoyment. I have a friend who literally fights with his neighbors. In fact, they've had competing restraining orders against him, gone to court. That's how bad. So you would disclose that there. So ongoing eminent domain issues, pendency of rent control, occupancy restrictions, and retrofit requirements that could affect property. So just so you know, there are rent control in most cities nowadays, some mild to more strict, but just be aware of that this is a seller aware, but there are a lot in place now. Existing contemplate building use of moratoria, current proposed bonds assessments, proposed construction reconfiguration, government improvements, protected habitat areas, historically designated. This property historically falls within the 64 historical district. If you're in downtown Sacramento or some of these downtown valley areas, they will have a historical district additional, which has additional restrictions on use of the property for that area. Your seller will know if they're in that area or not. It will affect everything from how they can rehab the property exterior and things like that. Any surcharges for water usage, private or otherwise. Is the address different? Is the address on the MLS different from the mailing address that you've provided for the property? Any occupancy for smoking or vaping, cultivation on the property? Is this originally constructed as a mobile home, manufactured home? Maybe it's on a foundation, but it's originally as a manufactured home. Is the property tenant occupied? It's vacant. It was tenant occupied. Past or present material defects affecting the design of the property. So that's pretty much it. Please do not let your seller skip questions on this. Lack of disclosure can be seen, non-checking the boxes can be seen lack of disclosure by the seller. All right, that is the seller property question. Any questions on that? Ooh, we're an hour in, 2, 3 done. One more, let's go. This is the one. This form, the age visual specialist, one of my favorites. 2, 3 done. One more, let's go. This is the one. This form, the age visual specialist, one of my favorites. It is the #1 way agents get sued. The #1 agents get sued is for lack of disclosure on the AVID. So you would put your name here. This is not your name. So you would put Killer 150 there. And there are instructions on how I want you to fill out this form. A lot of times, your TC will send you a glide form, which lets you do it online. So you need to be careful. The Glide program or other third-party apps allow you to take pictures through your AVID. I would advise and recommend you not to take pictures. That has been used against agents in lawsuits, trying to show that they didn't inspect the whole property, or say, why did you picture this but didn't picture this? So I would recommend keeping it as simple as possible. So when we are doing a property, I need you to describe the issue, but don't identify the problem. Here's what I mean. Don't diagnose the problem. You're not licensed contractor or inspector to do that. So what I mean by that, there's a stain on the ceiling. So if you say there's a water stain on the ceiling, guess what? You just diagnosed the problem. Do you know what's a water stain? You don't know, right? You don't know if it's current or not. Oh, so if there was a stain on the ceiling, I would say there is discoloration on the ceiling in the living room. Or even if it's, yeah, so stay away from adjectives. No adjectives. Does that make sense? The more you diagnose the problem, or as you are interpreting the source of the problem or diagnosing the problem, the more you put descriptors or adjectives on the problem that you're identifying will get you into trouble. So, I've also had lawsuits on these where they are challenging whether agents have inspected the area. So for example, oftentimes, well, maybe there is a living room and dining room, but there is no other room. But maybe there is a family room, or sometimes, let's go with sometimes there's only 2 bedrooms, 1, or there's only three bedrooms. 3. Makes sense? You need to put on these other ones, if you don't have anything, you need to put not applicable. That means you're not doing anything. If you inspect the kitchen, but there is nothing wrong, put nothing to report. I have agents said they have inspected the house and they said, yeah, but I didn't put anything. There was nothing there. And then they say, well, why didn't you see this? See this? Do you not agree that's an issue in the kitchen? And they can't prove they inspected the kitchen. Does that make sense? So if you inspect a location of the house and you don't find any defects, please put nothing to report. If a part of the AVID does not apply to the house, it's not a room in the house, or doesn't apply to the house or property, please put NA. Now, let's talk about this also. What do we not put on the AVID? We do not put brand new sink, kitchen sink in the, you don't describe the amenities of the house. It is for significant defects of the property. Significant defects of the property. So if there's nail holes in the wall, that is not a significant defect. If there is a substantial hole in the wall, that would be a material fact defect. Does it make sense? Substantial defect. So you got to understand scope things. Any questions on scope of that? And please note, there have been so many lawsuits on average, it's not even crazy. And I'll tell you a story that will scare you even more. So I'm saying there is discoloration on the ceiling. Well, I spelled that horribly, but you know what I'm saying. So discoloration on the ceiling. So that would be something if I noticed there was a stain on the ceiling. So things like that. Any questions on this? We have entry, living room, dining room, kitchen, other room, bedrooms. If there are 4 bedrooms, then you need to do bedroom 4. If you are, say there's 5 bedrooms on the house and you're going to use this one to do it, then I would put bedroom 5 and start my discussion. And I would say nothing to report. Does that make sense? So if you're using a generic holder place like other room, you need to make sure you identify the room. Now, here's the thing also, there's been dispute on which bedrooms you're actually inspecting when you talk about bedrooms. So I would do generally a description. So I'll say bedroom 1, I will say first left on the hall. And then I would type nothing to report. Does that make sense? So that you're able to talk a courtroom through, a jury through how you walk the house. Here's the floor plan. I walked here, I went there, then I walked there, then I walked there, then I walked here. You want to be able to identify how you went about looking at the house. Does that make sense? Same with bathrooms. You want to say, this is, this is the hall bathroom, bathroom 1, bathroom 2, upstairs hall bathroom, and then 3, master bathroom, right? Does it make sense? So you want to identify what room you are inspecting. I have had agents get blasted for not being descriptive, and then they get challenged on which room they were actually talking about. And usually these things are like a year or 2 later, and the agent forgot, and they look stupid in the whole hearing. So they get cornered. So please be descriptive when you're labeling bedrooms, bathrooms, or other rooms that do not have a generic description to them, so that you can identify which room in the house you're actually inspecting. Any questions on that? Remember, this is a lawsuit, so okay. Other. If you have other stuff here, please other it, but please be descriptive of what it is. Okay. CDM for additional rooms or structures. If you are beyond, you don't have enough room for additional, you're out of space for additional rooms or bathrooms, you can add an addendum here. But it is okay on the others to do bedroom 6, if you want to, you can do that as well. So on these others. It's only if you run out of other spaces, then you can do an addendum to add more if it's a really large house or has a lot of bedrooms. Garage and parking areas. This would include the garage and the driveway. And then we have exterior, front and backyards, and exterior of the building as well. So the exterior of the building, things like that. So say you walk in the building, you see some dry rot that looks like a dry rot. You don't put dry rot. You put damage to the wood, you know, on the awning over bedroom 3, for example. Oh, I spelled that horrible. So, does it make sense? Good, because you're not a pest inspector. You don't know if it's drywall. Make sense? So, other observed or unknown conditions stated above. If you are there and you happen to be doing the AVID and the school down the street is getting out at 3 o'clock and you're doing your AVID right there and you notice it gets jammed in parking lot, you need to note that in this other observed things. Make sense? So sometimes the seller will say, I don't want to disclose that because they're worried it will hurt the value and desirability of the property. I always say, look, it is a seller required disclosure state as well as an agent required disclosure state. So I will get sued too if I don't disclose the issue. And since you've told me, now I know. So now I am going to disclose it, and it's going to disclose on the agent visual inspection disclosure. I recommend you put on your seller TDS or SPQ because otherwise we're going to look incongruent and you could be exposed to a lawsuit and I won't, right? So then they'll jump it. And then please put the name of the person inspecting it. Please note, if you are having another agent complete the AVID inspection, they are now party to your inspection. That is a fiduciary duty, that is a fiduciary duty activity under a license. So if you have someone else do it, even if you pay them to do it, now you got to do an AAA and add them to the transaction. Please put your time and date. Please put the time. Please put the weather condition. And if there were other people present, home inspectors, buyer, seller, whatever, please put those present. That will, trust me, we've had lawsuits over AVIDs, and those other people present can really help you on this part if you identify the other people. So, and if there were other people there and you don't notice them, but you go to lawsuit and they say there were other people there, and they're gonna say, so why didn't you list them? Are you just lying? So please be careful about this disclosure. So, agent signs who performs the inspection, not the listing, but the agent who performs the inspection, the buyers, and then the seller's initial, and the other agent representing the buyer signs. So, let me tell you one quick story before we part on the AVID inspection. We had a new agent and first buyer, and they were a new home buyer, young, and they bought a home here in Sacramento, and the home was a raised foundation. It was a flip. The listing agent had flipped the home, and they were also selling it, so it was a little fishy there. Anyways, they do an inspection of the property, but actually, the inspector was there. They couldn't get into the property. Access, there was a tenant in there, so the home inspector had to leave. The listing agent calls back like 30 minutes later, says, I can have my inspector come right now. So the buyer has to use the seller's, who's also the listing agent, inspector, to come to the house. Anyways, they look at the house. Anyways, the house had foundation issues, meaning the house was uneven. The floor was uneven in parts of the house. You put a marble there, it would roll. And when we go through the transaction, the buyer's aware. They do a request for repair. The inspector says, they do a request for repair. They tear up the whole living room floor and redo it to even it out. Okay. Buyer closes on the deal. Good to go. He has a housewarming party. His dad comes over, who's a retired contractor. His dad looks at the property, says, dude, you should never bought this home. The foundation is bad. And they end up suing both the buyer's agent and the listing agent. And we're the buyer side of this new agent. And she says, no, we disclosed that it was uneven. In fact, here's a home inspection. Here's our request for repairs. Here's everything, right? And actually, I went to the house after this whole thing blew up. I went to the house and literally, I went to the bathroom and literally they had a shower with a sliding door, and it was so slanted, the sliding doors just stayed together on one side. Like if you rolled it out, it'd roll back. That's how slanted it was. So, and literally, it went to a lawsuit. And literally in the lawsuit, even though they said it was in the home inspection and we did a request for repair, so the buyer was aware, the listing agent, the buyer's agent never put it in their AVID. They are required to disclose all material defects with the significant defects of the property that affect the value and desirability of the property, and it's not in their AVID. Now, even though it's in a home inspection and you did a request for repair, it's not in your AVID. This buyer's agent, you have a fiduciary duty to represent your buyer and do a visual inspection and report to them all significant defects of the property, and you didn't. And literally, if she went in through and said, uneven floors, and did, uneven floors, and, does it make sense? So, and even if she did other house, has uneven floor, house has uneven floors throughout. If she just put those words into the agent visual inspection disclosure, she probably wouldn't. It ended up settling for about 120,000, and she wrote 30 of it. 30,000 of it. The seller wrote 90 in the settlement. So, and it's all because now there was an inspection, a request for repair to address some of the unevenness of the home, but just because she didn't put it in the AVID, the buyer's agent was stuck because they could prove lack of fiduciary duty by the buyer's agent. The main fact is you didn't put it in the AVID. So please, 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 please treat your AVIDs with the importance that they dictate, because I see it on the backside when we have disputes, and this is your get out of jail free card.
John, a quick question.
Yeah.
How did they resolve the issue? I didn't catch that.
They sued, and we went to mediation arbitration, and we settled, and they actually got a bid to redo the whole foundation of the home, and it was 120,000 to do the foundation of the home, plus legal fees. Sorry, plus legal fees. And we settled for that. So, and the agent, and I know the agent, they were just lazy, they were busy, they, single mom, she's just lazy and just didn't care about the AVID, just some form she had to do, and she just did it. And I was like, how could you not put the floors are uneven? Does it make sense? And she was just being lazy. It wasn't even like a purposeful thing, it was just a lazy thing. And it ended up selling for 30. We had E&O, but she had to pay a $10,000 co-charge, and we didn't, we did not pay our half because we said you were at fault. You should, this, and you were just being lazy. And so we ended up firing her from the brokerage firm because I don't do agents who don't take their fiduciary requirements responsibly. So trust me, you don't want this. You get an arbitration, mediation, even mediation arbitration on one of your transactions near involved. It sucks your energy, sucks your time, creates anxiety and frustration and worry, and gets you off your real estate game. Trust me, gets you off your real estate game. So you want to avoid these. The best way is just, when you do your AVID, be aware, just stop what you're doing. Don't answer your phone, like avoid the text message, and just sit down and walk the house and write about it. And if you can just do that well, that period of 15 minutes of walking the house and writing some stuff on is your get out of jail free card on every transaction. And if you do it poorly, I guarantee you it's just a matter, and you have a long career, I guarantee you there's just a matter of time before that becomes an issue. So,
John, I have a
any
question.
questions on this? Yes, go ahead, Jen.
Okay, so so I get the floors because I'm kind of like, well, yeah, obviously, right?
Obviously, yeah.
But so let's say okay, so I have a buyer right now and they couldn't get the hot water heaters to turn on. So obviously I've had a discussion with him, but do I go back but we don't really check the hot water heater on here. Like at what level is it okay, that was like blatantly obvious versus
So that's,
like,
oh yeah. So, oh yeah, okay. Now let's talk about, that's a good point. Thank you, Jen. Let's talk about visual. You're not required to turn anything on. You're not trying to turn anything off. You're not required to open or close anything. Visual. You do not touch, you look. So here's my thing. When I'm on the buy side, I usually do my AVID at the time of inspections. Okay. I do my AVID before the inspectors get there, because if the inspector says, ooh, that's dry rot, ooh, that's dry rot, guess what? Now you know. If the home inspector says the water heater's bad, now you know. And if you haven't done your AVID yet, you have to disclose that now, because now you know it's a material defect of the property. So when I do my AVID, I want to make sure I'm doing it before the inspections happen, because if I do that, then I'm not required to disclose whatever the inspectors find that they tell me. If I do my AVID
oh my gosh,
after.
but then if they do it before, you have to
And
basically
you're
like
aware of
list-
those, then you'll have to, I would at least acknowledge it in here. And other, I put, buyer, agent recommends, agent recommends buyer review home inspection, completed on, inspection, completed on XX, right? Completed XXX date, right? Whatever, right? For additional issues, right?
So smell either,
What's that?
like smell, like
Nail? Smell?
smell.
like urine, huge, like really,
Oh
really
yeah,
bad.
smells?
You-
Yeah, smells are in there. Yeah, definitely smells.
Okay.
Now, you don't describe the smell. So you just said urine smells. You don't know it's a urine smell. You're not an inspector. You don't put urine smell. You
Okay.
said there is a smell. There is a strong odor. Does it make sense? Make sense? There's an odor in the house. There's an odor in this
Yes.
bedroom. Does it make sense?
Okay.
That's what you put.
Okay.
No adjectives. No diagnosing. See, it seems innocuous. Oh, it's a urine smell. You're not an inspector. Trust me, I've literally been on hearings where they're grilling me and my agent, because I'm the broker, on how do you know it's a urine smell? Like literally asking me these things. We're pulling up emails and reports. Literally in court, I've had it where we're pulling up inspections and emails talking about what's this exactly mean, right? So
Thank you.
so just no pictures. Try not to use adjectives. Don't diagnose the problem. Describe what it looks like. You're doing a visual inspection. Describe what it looks like, or smells like, or feels like. Does that make sense? So, whew. Any other issues with the agent visual inspection disclosure? As we go forward, I'm just going to note, I am going to ratchet up the, what do you call it? The veracity, the completeness of our agent visual inspection disclosures. We've had a lot of agents doing poor agent visual inspections disclosures. So on the compliance side, we're going to start harshing this a little harsher to get more complete standards to the standards that I'm talking about today. So please be aware, we may kick back your AVID if it's not appropriate. So, any questions for any of these forms? We are now completed. It is almost 3 o'clock. Excellent timing, hour and a half. I love this. So any other questions? BRBC, TDS, SPQ, AVID. And you notice I put all these together. These 4 create the most disputes, legal disputes, these 4. So these 4 are my legal dispute session, right? These 4 complete disputes. So if you want to talk about BRBCs, AVIDs, TDS, SPQ, these are ones that result in lawsuits, right? So please, 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 please treat these 4 forms very appropriately. Okay. Okay. Next week, week 4 is the final of the 4-week series. That will include the SIP, the seller in possession, which is rent back. Also the RLAS, and we'll talk about the legal parameters that affecting each, which is pretty dramatic. We're going to talk about contingency releases. We're going to talk about request for repairs and responding to request for repairs in the next thing. And I think I'll add on VP too. Final inspection. Yeah, I'll add on VP too. So those forms will be the final forms that we're going to talk about in depth. And then I will repeat this starting next month as well. So thank you for your time. I do appreciate you. I know you are busy. And so please, I appreciate you taking time to invest in yourselves. Everyone have a great day, and I will see you next week.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, kind sir.
No problem.